What's happening, guys, and welcome back to another weekly scan. I hope that everyone had a nice long weekend. We're going to be putting this out on Monday night. And so we're going to stick with the format that we've been going over for the last couple of weeks, where I spend the first half of scan basically just running through all the names that were in play. And that should help with idea generation for people, just to get a pulse on what's been moving in this market, and just like a good, quick, broad overview of a lot of things that are happening, and that way you can draw whatever makes sense to your own trading style. And then in the second half of scan, I'm going to bring on Stan, who's been out for a couple of weeks, but we're going to be glad to have him back, and he's going to go over his main watches, and I will as well. So let's just get right into it, starting with GME. So, over the last 2 weeks, these have really been in play, GME and AMC. These have been the names that kind of started the meme cycle again. And then we got into things like FFIE and some other ones that really took on a life of their own. But GME was kind of the granddaddy of all those. And you could see that it really just had a massive round trip from the move. So you can see that it really went back to almost that equilibrium point where it was before Roaring Kitty even started the tweet. And so I just want to go over a couple different things and lessons from a chart like this. And that is that, you can't underestimate how far a move can go up. And then you also can't underestimate the symmetrical move back down. When there is no fundamental reason why something is moving, and when the reason why it was moving, which is someone was tweeting and you had a following behind it, when that really quiets down and goes back to the baseline of how it was before, it's usually common to see the stock do the same thing and just return to more of a long-term equilibrium point. Now, with that being said, you still had a stock fall from $80 down to $20, and it was a pretty smooth, ride for most of that. So you can see in here, a lot of people, once they got on the right side of the trade, they probably were swinging it and they probably were just letting it work, which is great. But after a certain amount of time, I think that, once the gains from shorting it really start to level out and it goes quiet, you have to be careful of those swipe backs, because as you get more people who are comfortable short and they're less price, or they're price sensitive, but they haven't been tested yet. And so once you have any kind of piece of news like we had on Friday with GME, they announced that they completed their ATM offering, and the stock shot up, a decent amount on that, several dollars worth. And so that can kind of be that gut check that we're talking about. So GME was definitely in play this week, and you can just see it was a beautiful round trip back to where it started. And it will probably continue like this. But if the people on Twitter start tweeting again about it, then you could have a secondary move and maybe come back up and test 30 or so, and then continue the road down. Another name that was in play was Reddit. We talked about this over the last couple of weeks, of kind of a bigger picture view, that symmetrical V shape. And you can see it kind of went up, tested the highs, and now it seems like it's really starting to fizzle out. So it's at a decent level right here, but I think that we might get a couple more attempts up, but without a new catalyst or without some of the meme names really moving, then I think that this could be on the backside of the move potentially. But again, I want to see what we call like a swipe test, and that's where whether it's on a larger time frame or a smaller time frame, a swipe test is where something you think might be on the backside of the move, but you don't know if it's just shorts walking it down and putting pressure on the stock, or if it's actual sellers. And so what a swipe test does is that when the stock eventually spikes back up, we want to see what happens to it. Does it spike back up and then immediately get stuffed right back down, and then it kind of continues on this downtrend? And that's a good swipe test if you're looking for the backside. But if it swipes back up and it just starts to hold, it shouldn't be doing that if it's on the backside, which probably means that it's not on the backside if it's spiking up and holding. And so that's like the clear out test, or the swipe test, that Nate talks about a lot, and that I like to see when I'm looking at a larger theme or a trend on a name. So that swipe test is really key. Going back to FFIE, we had this and a few other names almost make a round trip, not quite yet, still up fairly significantly. But I just want to highlight the change in action. You can see on the front side of the move, we talk about the front side and the back side of the move all the time. I just want to kind of differentiate what those are. And I want you to look at a couple of things. One is the volume. This huge increase in volume as this thing was ramping up. And you can see that while it's still on the front side of the move, the volume is pretty symmetrical. And then you kind of have this big capitulation move and slam down, and the volume is still there, but you can see it's red volume. Now, that's kind of like the first phase of it. The second phase is when you have that dip and then it rips back up here and kind of stuffs into that level. Still significant volume, but you can see after that, that's like that swipe test or that clear out test that we're talking about, where it swipes up and then what happens? It gets stuffed back down, and then you can see the volume starting to drop off and lower highs, and it makes a much cleaner trend down. So that's just something I want to kind of go over, the volume profile and some of the moves on the front side versus the back side. And we can see this on other names like CRKM. Very same thing, where it's ramping up. You see peak volume kind of going up in here, up to the capitulation, retests with that red volume, which is similar to what the other volume was on the front side. And then after that swipe test, you can really see it fades back down, and then the volume profile changes. And it goes from having high volume and symmetrical volume to, after that last swipe test, you can see the volume starts to trickle off. And then you're in kind of a new range. And so this can be a much cleaner way to play some of the backside in these things, rather than getting stopped out 10 times trying to fight something on the way up. You can just wait for that huge crack, or depending on your style, you could join this later on this, after the swipe test, and still have significant range with a lot less head eggs than if you're constantly battling on the front side. So different styles. Like to do different things. Some people like to short into the parabolics. Some people like to long on the way up and then, dip buy. So there's just lots of opportunity in these different names depending on what you want. But if you're looking for something that's lower stress, you can look for that parabolic move, that capitulation, the volume really starting to change after that last swipe test, and then it starts to drop off. And that's how it kind of fades back to where it came from, or pretty close. MARA, we talked about this last week. I had 21 strike calls on this, which ended up working out. I held them from the previous Friday through Monday, and Mara was up 15% on Monday, which was great. And this has some nice clean moves, so I was able to cash out on some of those 21 strike calls. It's basically just been trending with crypto. We have a couple other names that I'm going to get into later, like Coin, where Bitcoin is really back up into that 68 to 70K range, and that's kind of the back in play for like the bullish thesis, and especially with a longer weekend, we can have some significant crypto moves with that, and then we'll see how the market opens. But I just wanted to highlight that Mara and all the other names, CLSK, Riot, and all of those are kind of following the same theme, where if we get back into a bullish trend on Bitcoin, then a lot of the names can have a good range. And then if something changes, if Bitcoin starts to trade back down, then we can definitely get some backside on some of those moves. NVEX, we've been talking about this one and identifying those channels. And so you can see this channel up here around that, call it 1460 or so. It doesn't have to be precise to the penny, but call it 1460-ish. And then down here around, anywhere from 1150 to some other areas. But you can see it's starting to break out of this channel and base above it. And so as long as it's above here, so like that 1480 level or so, anywhere in here, it's starting to base above, and that is a bullish trend. So until we kind of have a capitulation on the upside, I would assume that this will probably, keep chugging along, keep making higher lows until we get one of those days where you either have outlier volume, kind of take it up and, capitulate out, or if we just get a pullback in the market, or if this flushes down, fails to reclaim, does the swipe test, and then starts to change trends. So I attempted this one a couple times this week. And I got chopped up a little bit on it just because some of these moves were a little bit tricky. You could see in here where it looked like it was starting to base out and break out, but then just immediately, it's like a reverse swipe test where instead of swiping up and then fading off, it flushed down like the dip and rips and came right back. So not the easiest name, but definitely a longer term and bigger picture trend still in play here. Baba, we talked about a couple of the Chinese names and the Chinese theme, and what we've really seen is that the Chinese names are falling into two categories. China is a difficult environment. We've talked about this before. Very difficult economy, and they're going through a lot right now. But you have, some money starting to roll back in, but it's being selective. And I want to compare the difference between something like Baba and look at, the chart on this, which has huge range, huge pullbacks. And I want you to compare this to something like PDD. And PDD, you can see it still has, some of the range, but a lot of the times it has this big, nice consolidation. That's really what you want to see for a move that's basing higher. And so I said that I liked this chart better than Baba's chart. And I think that once, we're now starting to break out of this range, I think we could continue to see some highs. And PDD had some really great earnings. They had great numbers. So even though that they're in a difficult environment, they're definitely like a leader out there. And so they are going to get the bulk of the capital. So I just want to compare that to Baba. CTNT, we saw a ton of liquidation trades this past week. And just for anyone who's not super familiar, a liquidation trade is these companies, they're usually foreign companies, and they have a huge amount of the stock is locked up. And basically it's held by either insiders or management or someone who is controlling most of the float. And so what they do is they walk it up over a series of days or weeks or even up to a month. And then one day they will flush it down and basically liquidate all of the shares that were inside there. And you can see these. Sometimes people like to short them, but just my 2 cents on the topic is that you just have to be so careful, because even if you're using technical signals and even if you're doing swipe tests to kind of, keep yourself safe in some regards, you have to be careful when someone controls most of the float and they're specifically trying to hurt people financially, because they could easily do, the flush down and then they can bring it right back up to new highs. And that's how you get those crazy moves like ZJYL and some of the other ones that they fake like they're going to liquidate, and they'll get down to, a couple of dollars and then they'll swipe it back up. And you can see, this is kind of what happened here, where they kind of walked it up to that, $15 mark, flushed it all the way down to a couple dollars, $3 or so. And, someone might think that, oh, this is the liquidation day, I'm going to hammer in, and they might get a couple of thousand shares that they're trying to short. And right after that, you can get into halts and you can get these massive moves where I was in at $3, now it's at 45. I don't know what to do. The account's ruined. So these are just things that, in my opinion, for my trading, I would never recommend someone try to short these. Again, I know different people can do it, but it's just not worth that risk, to me. Anywhere or anytime a stock can really wipe out an account, that's just not something that you want to be dabbling in my opinion. And we saw a couple more of these names. SWIN, same kind of deal. They walk it up, they fake it down. You can see they did it here too, where they fake like they're going to liquidate it, soak it right back up, and that can be a big blow to someone's account if they're getting aggressive in here down at 15 and automatically swipes back up. And the thing is, once it gets into circuit halts, you don't know when they're going to basically unhalt it, because if you have the people who are controlling the float kind of in there at the auction while it's halted, then they can really manipulate things up and down. And so it's like playing Russian roulette, and it's just it's not a wise thing to do with any kind of size. But in my opinion, I think that they're just best to be avoided entirely on the short side. Just my opinion. MTC, you can see the same kind of deal, another liquidation trade. So these have been going on in the market for a little while. And then getting into some other names. NVIDIA had earnings over the past week, stellar earnings. I mean, really, really good. And you can see, it kind of reminds me of that SMCI move when it had really stellar earnings a couple of months ago, or even a quarter or two ago, where it's just gapping up. It's almost undeniable how good the numbers are. You can see the volume come in, it's basing, dip and ripping, and I think that this could be pushing on 1200 within the next couple of weeks. The stock's up a lot, but so are the fundamentals. So until that changes, this trend is in play. INTU, in earnings play, this was one, they're the owners of TurboTax and some other things. And so they had some numbers that the free users on TurboTax are basically starting to drop off a little bit from 11 million down to 10 million. Snow was another earnings gap down. They had some issues with their profitability. They had some decent revenue, but they gapped down. And we'll see if this is just a swipe test back up and if it stays heavy, or if it starts to kind of build and consolidate, make some higher lows, and then make its way back up. MMV, a lot of these small caps, again, you can see front side of the move, back side of the move, look for the capitulation, look for the volume change, the swipe test, and we're just going to run through these really quick. Almost all of these had catalysts. They had huge volume come in, they had higher lows, then they had a capitulation, they had key levels get underneath, and then they had a volume change, and then they drifted back off. So MGOL was another one that fit that criteria. MGRX, same kind of deal. You can see the big blow off move here, come back, swipe test, and then start to fade off for that backside of the move. And these are just the small caps that are kind of the go-tos for the gap and crap, or the things that are just up on unsustainable reasons, and they usually get faded back down. BNED, same thing. This one was a little bit more spread out, so it took a couple of days. You can see this first day had the volume come in, kind of faded back, and this is almost like that liquidity trap that we talk about, where in the following days, if the volume dries up and then it comes back, it can break those highs, have that kind of symmetrical move, and this one held some higher lows, and then the front side of the move kind of ended up here, and then you can see that swipe test, the volume change, and that is the backside of the move. ONMD, you can see this is another one that took a couple of days to play out. So you can see the ramp up, kind of consolidate here, move back up, and then this prior resistance becomes support, and it's just kind of doing that process again. So until that trend really breaks, we can assume that this is nearing the backside, but we don't have confirmation of that yet. So we would want to see another swipe test, and then see it get below key levels and see the volume profile change as well. PEGY, this one was in play, and again, a lot of these small caps have been having huge volume and very large ranges. So as long as they are holding these higher lows over multiple days, you can assume that the trend is still in play until they kind of have that blow off move, get below key levels, and fade back down. ASTI, I believe Cody had a trade on this one, or at least he was watching it, but this one over the last few days had some kind of a catalyst, I believe. A ton of volume came in, and then it had that big blow off move before doing the same thing that we're talking about. CADL, you can see, over the last month or so, this has really maintained its its higher lows and its higher highs until you have that kind of swipe test, crack down, and now it's below key levels, and so we can assume that the trend has changed. LUCY, this was a difficult one to try to fight on the front side. Might have taken a couple of attempts, but Nate has a good rule that, like, if you're trying something, 2 or 3 times, it's just time to move on until it gets underneath those key levels, and then you can come back to it and nail the rest of the trade. But sometimes if you just keep going after something, you can get so exhausted that by the time the backside of the trade comes around, you don't even want to trade it. So that's just something to keep in mind. Wait for the volume profile to change, wait for it to get under key levels, and you should have a clean move there. BZFD, BuzzFeed, Vivek Ramaswamy, I think, took a 7% position in this one. So this had an initial spike up, and we'll see if it kind of consolidates here. The volume dries up, and maybe it does a liquidity trap kind of pattern, or if it just kind of swipes up, cracks down, and then fades off back into the abyss. And that's pretty much it for the names that I wanted to run through. So for the next part of Scan, I want to get into the t-shirt winners. And so we had 2 winners this week. Both left good comments, and I encourage everyone else to leave comments in the comment section. So we had Gabino725, and then we had Jason Dratman5584. Congratulations. You have both won free t-shirts, and you can email webmaster@investorsunderground.com to claim your prize. And now we're going to bring Stan on to go over our main watches. But before I bring him on, I want to say that neither Stan nor I are financial advisors. These are not buy or sell recommendations, and what we discuss is for informational and educational purposes only. So let's bring on Stan. All right, we're joined by Stan. Stan, welcome back to Scan. You've been away for a couple of weeks, so you came back to the market with some fresh eyes, and I'm sure that you were thrilled to see how many things are moving. So welcome back, and what are your market thoughts, and what do you have on watch for the week?
Great. Thanks for having me, Chris. It's good to be back, and it's always nice to disconnect for a little bit. Like you mentioned, it gives you that fresh set of new eyes, perspective. So a couple of things on watch for me. Obviously, on Friday, which is today, we're recording today. Lucy had pretty much close to 1 billion shares traded. So, goes with the recent theme of FFIE that has been, trading large volume. So for me, the main watch for the upcoming week is going to be Lucy. Obviously, we had some key areas that just never proved to stay heavy, starting with this 47 that was identified in the room. And then, as you can see, it just kept on defending VWAP throughout the whole day. This is the type where it's very easy to size up, and you're sizing up versus 30 versus 40 cents, then versus 50, and before you know it, you're over $1.05 sized up as this is something within 40, 50, 60 cent range. And I think that is something to be very cautious with when it comes to trading some of these sub dollar stocks. For me, when something crosses that threshold mark, it's a fresh trade. It has new variables, new way the way the flow of orders moves differently, etc. So they did a great job, keeping it up right into the last hour, and then obviously now after hours it's failing some. But for me, on a Monday, what I'd like, or a Tuesday, given it's a 3-day weekend, what I'd like to see is some sort of a push, retest this $1 mark. Obviously, you can pull back on the daily, and you can see the gap fill that we have. So any sort of test within this 30-40 cent range, or even depending on how we close the rest of the after hours, I don't mind using some of these levels here within the 80, obviously 80 to about 96, 97. That was key. Pretty much just watching how it traded throughout the day. So push versus these levels, and then look to scale in. But again, you can't ignore the fact that it traded, about 1 billion shares. So it is unlikely to be a single candle wonder type of thing. The next one that I have on watch is FFIE. And this one for me is essentially just looking for that sub $1 flush. So little higher time frame chart here. We can see a bunch of volume turned, and now on the backside, we tested one here on what, I don't know if this was Wednesday or Tuesday or Wednesday, one of the days. But they defended it, and as you know, they have plenty of reasons to defend the $1 level. So I believe they're going to try to as best as they can, but ultimately it's going to do the slow unroll sub $1, and that's really what I want to capture on the short side. So we'll be monitoring this. Higher the better. Pops that stay heavy interest me pretty nicely. The next one that I haven't watched is the CADL. Sorry, I keep typing in the wrong box. CADL. This is something a little higher time frame view. Obviously, nice little day on Friday. It went it started after hours Thursday, pushed into the 16-17s area, and then it fell. Pretty much gave up the entire move by open, and then once it shoved against 10. It was just nonstop. Felt like they were just tapping into the ATM or something. So higher the better for this one. Ideally, I'll be looking for something into the low fives eventually. But anything versus 950 would be great to scale in. And another little bit bigger picture. Idea is CVNA versus the 110s, and we can see obviously the 110 has been defended here over the past week or so, couple weeks. So for me, any sort of push that stays heavy versus this congestion area, I don't mind joining for a fade to low or sub 100. And last but not least is GME. And AMC, GME mainly. What I'd like to see is a nice little pop there after hours on Friday on the PR that they closed the ATM or closed the offering they had out there, and so really what I'd like to see is one last shove maybe on Tuesday. Versus this 23-25 area, and then look to fail to follow through, and then eventually sub 20s back into the teens. AMC similar thoughts, obviously different price, but anything versus this 550s to then eventually once the 450s 4 gives up, faded on the way back. And that's pretty much it. Everything that I have for next week.
Excellent. Those are great. And if you could pull up GME again, I feel like since the big fade, the big spike, roaring kitty stuff, and then it was a pretty smooth fade from those highs. And I feel like sometimes when you have these names where it really hasn't caused a whole lot of gut checks or a lot of pain for short sellers on the way down. As it comes down, even though it's still at levels that are above where it started from, you have to look at two things, in my opinion. One, how far has it come down? And if you look at the drop from 80 down to whatever 19, that's a significant drop, especially over the course of a week or two. And so one thing is that the mean reversion, it's not necessarily the long-term mean reversion that's happening. Sometimes it's a shorter term mean reversion, and that can be from an overcrowding of shorts or other things. You need a big swipe up or a gut check, and I think that's kind of what we got on Friday when they announced that after hours that they did close it. And again, this isn't a huge gut check, but I do think that something like this, I get very cautious when something is smooth and then it's just very quiet. And there's no reason for anyone who's been swinging it short or anything to really get out. And so just when you have a really smooth long going up for too long, you have weak hands in there too. And it's the same thing when you have a really smooth short. And so you're going to get those price sensitive people who are on the short side to cover their positions when you have any kind of gut check like that. And then you'll come back on Tuesday and you'll see how it's acting. But it's just something to keep in mind. One, the level of mean reversion from a huge drop down. And then the second thing is when there's been no gut check and you've had a quiet name, you can never totally expect it, but you should be cautious of any little thing that could set it off and kind of cause that gut check. Right. So, and then my main watches for the week are starting with Coin. So last week we talked about a couple of names like Mara and CLSK, all kind of running with Bitcoin, and Bitcoin had a nice run up, to those 70K levels again, and that really took a lot of the stocks with it. So I think Coin is coiling nicely. It has some bullish options activity in it, and I think that it could be potentially poised for a move higher, maybe past 250 or so over the coming week or two, as long as Bitcoin really holds up. And again, these names are very tied to the price of crypto. And so if we open up the market on Tuesday and Bitcoin is 60K or something, then this thesis would be invalid because I want a couple of things going in this direction. That's the price of Bitcoin. I want altcoin trading activity to be, going well, like the meme coins and everything. Basically, things that are going to be bringing attention to coin and things that help its business. So I'll be watching for basically dips and either to enter equity or call positions as it retests key levels. And then the next one that I have on watch is Meta. So META. This one had a big flush after earnings, and I feel like some other names like JP Morgan, a lot of these flushed, and then they've started to kind of work their way back. And I think that that's what we're going to see in Meta over the course of the next couple of weeks, unless there's some kind of bad news or some kind of market turn. But I could see this just kind of slowly grinding up, recovering that. It flushed out all the price sensitive longs, and it flushed out a lot of the option activity. So it kind of had a tape reset. And I think that we're coming to a point now where as long as the market starts to hold up, that this will chug along with it. And then it's kind of the same game plan as coin. I'm looking for relative strength during the week. I'm looking for dips to hold levels. I'm looking for little dip and rip candles, and then that could signal to me that it could be a good point for a long, either with call options depending on the premium prices or potentially with equity. But usually I'm playing these larger names with options. And then the next name that we have is PDD. So last week we talked about the China theme. It's a very beaten down market. They have huge problems over there. But if you get some new capital flowing in, you can have these periods where you get some stock inflation. And so PDD was the best looking chart in my opinion. It had some bullish option activity in it, and it was breaking out after actually pretty solid earnings. And so it's kind of one of those situations where the environment that it's in is not great, but the company itself is making money and they are growing and they're doing all the right things. It's more just how much does their environment kind of hold them back? But so far, they're pushing through. And I think that this is a good contrast as opposed to something like Baidu, BIDU, which is, the same environment, but not as great, fundamentals. And it's a similar situation with BABA, BABA, where it's just, just like in our markets, you have names that have relative strength, relative weakness, and over there you have a difficult environment, and so it takes something to be really doing well, beating earnings, growing to stand out. And so PDD fits that criteria for me. Let's see what else we have. The next one I have on watch is Dell, DELL, and that after NVIDIA earnings, which I'll get to that in a second, but I feel like after NVIDIA earnings, it's like a big pivot in the market where it's just kind of an update. Who in that sector is still thriving? Who is being made less relevant? Who's being, who's gaining market share? Who's losing market share? And you just kind of get these updates of the whole sector when you have the leader report earnings, because NVIDIA is, 80% of the data center market, and they're a huge player in the AI space. And so they kind of set the tone. And then I looked at some of these secondary names to see who is who's doing well over the next quarter or so. And so Dell meets that criteria for me. And you can see it's had a nice breakout. So as long as the AI theme stays strong, I will be watching Dell for relative strength with the sector, as opposed to something like AMD, which has had some relative weakness. It bounced a little bit. But you can definitely see how some of the names are struggling, and it's that same concept. Like, what is the environment that they're in? What's the sector that they're in? And then which names within that are outperforming and which ones are underperforming? And that's where I look to either relative strength for possibly calls or relative weakness for possibly puts. And AMD was actually it's set up for a really nice trade on Thursday, I believe. as the market pulled in. And you can see, those are significant moves, and you could see pretty much off the open which names were behaving relatively weak. And so that's just something to keep in mind for when you do eventually have those, market down days, that you can have those really clean trending names. And so let me just check. And the last one that we have is NVIDIA. So saving the best for last. NVIDIA had earnings, very positive earnings. They're growing at an alarming rate. This is something that we've talked about over the course of the year where, yes, the stock has made a massive move, but also so have the fundamentals as well. And if you have the fundamentals, and the earnings that are going up 5 or 6x, and the revenue that's tripling and doing all these things, it's, it's staying around the same valuation as it goes up, even though the chart is going higher. And so that's kind of one of the beauties of business investing, is that if you do have the fundamentals in line with that, you can get these spectacular moves without huge drawdowns along the way. So NVIDIA is the leader. I can really see this going to probably 1,200 or so over the course of the next maybe week or two. And that sounds like a lot, but you have to remember compounding. And if this is going up a few percent a day, and if it's in a bullish market, it doesn't take much to really get it there. So NVIDIA is on watch for relative strength for me. So yeah, that's quite a mouthful there. But Stan, do you have any thoughts on any of the larger caps going into the next week?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll definitely keep NVIDIA on watch. They also announced their forward split as well. So, I think 1,000 for NVIDIA was on everybody's mind. I think it's one of those things where we get it, but then what happens right after? So if on Friday that 1,000 mark failed, I think that could have provided a little jolt. But so far, as you mentioned, they had good earnings. The fundamentals are following along. And, I would not be surprised to see this 1,200, 1,500 in the near future, unless something fundamental changes along the way.
Yeah, exactly. And, so much of the money that they're getting, the revenue, is from the capital expenditures of other companies like Google, like Amazon, and some of these other names. So, and I think there's like three companies that make up almost half of their revenue growth, or a lot of their profits. And so you can kind of keep track of those companies as they report earnings to see, are they continuing to do some capex? Are they cutting back on that? And then that can, those are the inputs that really feed into that. And if you get a situation where, let's say, Google or a couple of these other names, let's say they need to cut back on those capital expenditures, let's say they're not seeing the return on their investment from some of their AI activity, they're going to trim that back, and that could be a turning point for NVIDIA. But I don't think that we're there yet. But I think that, not the bearish case, but you always have to be open to, both situations. What can move a stock up? What can move it down? What can take the fundamentals up? What can take them down? And those are just the things that I think about. So that's what I'll be paying attention to over the coming months for NVIDIA. But yeah, so I think that was some good watches, Stan, and I'm looking forward to having you back in the room. And yeah, I hope that everyone has a great week, short week. So just remember to like and subscribe, share this video with someone who you think would benefit from it, and we will see you guys in the room. Thanks, Stan.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Have a good day.
Thanks.